यस्तन्मयान् हृदयसंवदनक्रमेण द्राक् चित्रशक्तिगणभूमिविभागभागी हर्षोल्लसत्परविकारदुषः करोति वन्दे तमाम् तमहं उदुतभावतंसम्. Friends, we are really fortunate to have Professor Mrinal Kaul, a learned scholar, with us today to deliver the second lecture in our Pratyabhijnanam series. A studious researcher and an ardent student of Indian philosophy in general and Trika system in particular, Professor Mrinal is working as faculty member in the Humanities Cell of IIT Mumbai. I am happy to state that he belongs to the rare community of Sanskritists, rare species, I should say, of Sanskritists who hold broad and critical views about Indian culture and Indian knowledge systems. Okay, friends, let us all extend a warm welcome to Mrinal. Over to Mrinal.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. As I keep saying, I speak so often in Kerala, whether being physically present or being present online. And it just gives me every time some alaukika pleasure, even if I'm in place far away. So I would like to begin by just thanking Professor Sundareshwaran to give me this opportunity. And so I see Naresh here. It's wonderful to see him also here, and others who I know, I don't know because I can't see everyone. So welcome and thank you so much for being here. So I would just share some thoughts, ideas. They're scattered here and there, but it's just an sort of experiment because Professor Sundareshwaran told me that you majorly have to address students. Of course, there are scholars as well. So then I thought, okay, I should majorly make it something like to talk to students, for instance. So let me begin. I have something in written, and I will read it. I'll try to, of course, wherever I think there is some explication needed, intervene. I hope I have managed to puzzle some of you. Sorry, I should begin also by I have something like can all of you see it, or Professor Sundareshwaran, can you see the screen?
No.
I can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I hope it goes back and forth and okay, perfect. So now the problem is I can't see any of you. So if there is any trouble, please just use the Shabda Pramana to stop me or tell me if the slides are not working and so on and so forth. I hope I have managed to puzzle some of you with the title of my lecture. Like yesterday, I saw a comment on the poster of my lecture circulating on Facebook. It said, "So Catholicism predates Abhinavagupta." When I saw this comment, I exclaimed to myself, so I managed to confuse you. Isn't that the whole point? That I give you a challenge inviting you to think rather than coming to absurd and uninformed conclusions without even making an attempt to explore creatively what the author would have wanted to say. And there is always a difference between what I am wanting to communicate to my listeners and what the listeners are wanting to hear from me. We are not always on the same platform, and thus it is not always possible to have samvada. So in other words, from a Shastric point of view, you are supposed to, I mean, to have the samanadhikaranatvam is something fundamentally important. Of course, even for the samatva of the adhikarana, there have to be two candidates, of course, but they have to have some kind of same substratum on which they are located. Let us say that you really like the title of my lecture, or you really like listening to the lecture of Mrinal Kaul. But today, after listening to Mrinal Kaul, you were very disappointed and unhappy. Mrinal did not say what you were expecting him to say, i.e., he did not speak your language. He did not resonate your ideas. He said something that was totally unexpected from him. He said Abhinavagupta was a Catholic. Well, did he? And even if he did, what did he mean to say? Did he mean Abhinavagupta was a Roman Catholic Christian? The question is, why did Mrinal say what he said? And if Mrinal did not mean to say that, i.e. that Abhinavagupta was a Roman Catholic Christian, what else did he mean to say by saying, how Catholic is Abhinavagupta? The people who only believe in facts and do not bother to think about them usually succumb to such provocations. The problem is that I may know the whole Sanskrit corpus by heart, but I do not know what to do with it, i.e. how to interpret it. We have lost the art of interpreting. So here is an exercise when Professor Sundareswaran told me that, okay, I want you to speak to students and, inspire them from some ideas and so on and so forth. So, of course, the first thing that came to my head was little provocation. I mean, not being slaves of facts and information and so on and so forth, but to see these ideas in terms of an hermeneutic exercise, what can we do with them? And what are these different distinct creative possibilities of dealing with them? So I go ahead with my script. What is the point of any intellectual exercise if it does not provoke you to think? I may be able to give you all objective information about history, books, authors, etc., etc., and this information is just jnana. But if I do not purposely provoke you to think along with me, I am a failure. I have to make an effort to moving from jnana to pratyabhijnana. And I want all of you to think, I mean, when I say all of you, I mean particularly students, that what is the difference if you have to, from epistemological point of view, from a very Kavya-shastric point of view, or from whatever point of view, if you have to just complicate or problematize just this one word, pratyabhijnana, and how do you interpret the prati upasarga? How do you interpret just the prefix, philosophically speaking, right? So, and how does it make this big distinction between jnana and pratyabhijnana? In fact, it would be an injustice to Abhinava himself and to this platform that has chosen samvadana and pratyabhijnana as the key words for this lecture series. The sam in samvadana and prati in pratyabhijnana are the upasargas representing nothing but intellectual provocation, and we better don't forget that. Of course, Abhinava was a Catholic, i.e., but he was Catholic with a C in small case. That means he had broad or wide-ranging tastes and interests. He had sympathies with all. He was broad-minded and liberal. That his philosophy was universal in extent. In other words, he was a philosopher of Catholic tastes. I want to argue that Abhinavagupta maintained a unique Catholicity of approaching and interpreting his source materials, be it dualist Shaiva Siddhantins or Buddhists, and by Buddhists I mean both the idealists and realists, for want of better terms. I have to use these English terms. inclusivity of ideas from all the different systems of thought across the range of disciplines he contributed to. His non-dual world was defined by open-endedness, bringing together radical opposites or the multiplicity of ideas or doctrines and put them in a ubiquitous crucible. In fact, I have been thinking of the possibility of calling his system as Catholic Advaita, because his system makes an unceasing effort to transcend both duality and non-duality. It is as if I were to say an open-ended meta-non-dualism. Look, for instance, at this verse from the Malani Vijayavartika, one of Abhinava's fundamental philosophical works, and how he weaves here the idea of Dvaita and Advaita and Dvaya Vada idea, and how he wants to tell you that I am talking of an Advaita beyond all these three categories. That's why the word iti yatra samam bhati, or in other readings also yati, iti yatra samam bhati tad advayam udahritam. What is that non-duality he is talking about that comes together and is reposed samam bhati in all three, i.e. duality, non-duality, and duality come non-duality? Is he just wanting to create a definition of undefinable that he does, for instance, an exercise, an hermeneutic exercise he's very fond of? He does that in Paratrishika Vivarana, where he gives you almost 14 or 16 different definitions of just the word deva based on the dhatu part of Panini, how what all deva can mean, and then the same way he gives you 5 definitions of Devi, the feminine absolute idea, and so he does that across the texts, but the whole sarvam hi sarvatmakam, or sarva sarvatmakatva, by what he means all is the nature of all. Is it like creating an ontology of an oxymoron? But does this sound some simplistic inclusivism, or an attempt to create a chitradvaitavada? And I also use that chitradvaitavada in my language. I translate again that as the Catholic Advaita. And this chitradvaitavada, because by chitra, of course, he means that the plurality, the manyness, and so on and so forth. And in this term as such, I have not seen him using the chitradvaitavada, but it is resonating in many of his works. For instance, he would have expressions also in Tantra Loka, in Malani Vijay also, Maheshash chitra paribhasana shilaha. Or this is from Malani Vijayottara. Or he would have also Tantra Loka explanation where he calls the upayas as chitra. Chitropayopadeshopi na virodha baho bhavet, for instance. Look at another verse from the Malani Vijaya where even the Buddhists are made into Shaivas. Eko bhavaha sarva bhava swabhavaha sarve bhava eka bhava swabhavaha arhadvadaha so ayam asmat sudrishtau yuktascha shrisara shastre vijoktaha. For Abhinava, like for Wittgenstein, to quote the latter, now I am doing my exercise, I am seeing these parallels, and I'm just trying to, I mean, it's limited time, but I'm just trying to bring together ideas, and of course, one can write in detail about them. What do I mean by bringing in Wittgenstein here, and so on and so forth. For Abhinava, like Wittgenstein, to quote the latter, and I quote Wittgenstein from the beginning of his tractise, and the quotation is, The world is everything that is the case.
Mrinal,
The world,
Mrinal,
sorry,
can I ask a question?
in the mid?
Can I make
Yes.
a question? Arihadvada.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean, that term?
Arhat, here simply Arhatvada is referring to majorly Buddhists. Now, one can argue that he was probably also referring to Jainas, but mostly it has always been the case by Arhat term, he is referring to the Buddhists. So, generically, he is just simply referring to Buddhists. If you see the verse before this or verse after this, he is not referring to any particular, for instance, theory or particular doctrine of the Buddhists, even of Yogacharans or Sautrantikas or whosoever. But it's kind of understood Buddhists being his, let's say, general enemies, like Pradhana Mallan Nibharana Nyaya. So he would mostly refer to them in such language sometimes, not always. Of course, he has in many in commentarial texts particularly, because this is a sort of versified commentary. This Malini Shloka Vartika is a versified commentary on Malini Vijottara Tantra. It doesn't have how he would go ahead, for instance, in the Pratyabhijna Shastra, in all the commentaries, the Lagvi and Brihati, the Vimarshini and Vivritti Vimarshini, where it's very structured, that each argument is taken from the opponents and then that is taken to task. In a text like this, that is not the case. So here and there he would refer to Sankhya-vadins, Yoga-vadins, and that actually makes this text very difficult to approach, because you are not always clear that who exactly is he referring to, and what exactly is his argument towards who, and what is in his mind. That is not always easy. That makes this text actually very difficult. Even though language-wise, if you see here also, it sounds like it's understandable. Language is not that very difficult. Does that make sense, sir?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, so I can go ahead. For Abhinava, like Wittgenstein, to quote the latter, and I quote Wittgenstein from the beginning of his practice, I quote, "The world is everything that is the case. The world is the totality of facts, not of things. The world is determined by the facts and by these being all the facts." I'm referring by, see, in practice, all is in italics. Being all the facts, it resonates with the idea of sarva, for instance, the all-inclusivity idea. For the totality of facts determines both what is the case and also all that is not the case. Now this is fundamentally important for all Advaita Vadas, because even for Shankara or Bhadraya, whosoever, all the Advaitins, a fundamental question every time which comes in front of them: how do you define then non-existence or abhava or absence? What status, philosophically speaking, do you give to the idea of absence? If absence is also an idea that is, but then how are they in the same substratum, the being and not being? That is somewhere really fundamental. I mean, Nayayikas won't have that problem, because of course they are straightforwardly defining categories for that. For Abhinava, it is only through empirical reality that we can establish the absolute reality. It's an argument almost that Abhinava would give you, that since there is an effect, if going by the principle of causality, that is this empirical reality, very much real. In David Schulman's language, more than real. I cannot get away with that more for last so many years, since when I have read More Than Real, his marvelous book, which has helped me every time I mention that in lectures, which has helped me understand Abhinavagupta much, much, much better. And I do recommend that book to all students to read it. It's a very simple book, and one should read it carefully. But to say that from the doctrinal principle terms of how causality of the Shaiva Advaitavadins works is that it is because of the effect that this empirical world is, there has to be a cause. So instead of saying there is a cause and effect has to be there, Abhinav is, he's let's say the theory of God, for instance, he would say that, because there is this evolute or manifestation, so this manifestation has to have an unending anadi cause. But that's a different thing that, you can't maintain the principle of causality in his system also in the same way as Nagarjuna and others and so on, even Sankhya-vadins, because his system cannot adhere to the duality idea. So at any cost, the duality has to be, you have to get away with duality. So that's why at some points of time you see that he comes across as a very radical non-dualist, even as compared to Shankara and others and so on and so forth. He would come across as a very radical non-dualist. For Abhinava, it is only through empirical reality that we can establish the absolute reality. Or to say that the so-called empirical reality is itself absolute reality. How can it not be? So whatever is and is not is ubiquitous and also of the nature of all, going back to the principle earlier of Sarvam Sarvatmakam. In such cases, it does become a strong challenge to define and deal with the problem of non-existence or absence. But the Catholicity also has to accommodate the non-existence. And thus, our categories of inquiry should be, and these are the questions, of course, for students to think across these categories of inquiry. How do we understand bhava, abhava, swabhava, niswabhava, and so on and so forth? Look, for instance, at this verse from the Mahabharata that Abhinava quotes in the Paratrishika Vivaranam. Tyaja dharmam adharmam cha ubhe satya nrite tyaja ubhe satya nrite tyaktva yena tyajasi tatyaja. This also closely resonates with the Ishopanishad tena tyaktena punjitha. One comment footnote I want to make here is that, of course, see, Abhinava is, you can see in his commentaries everywhere, he is staunchly against the principles of what we call today Advaita Vedanta. The fundamental problem for him there is that Brahman is a Kevala. And this whole business of Maya, they have not, that is to say Vedantins and the Advaita Vedantins, have not been able to do justice with, according to him. And for him, let's say in Vedantic language, Brahman and Maya, for him, Shiva and Shakti, or Prakash and Vimarsha, or the subject and object, whatever you want to call it, are just one and the same reality. Now, if you can say meta-reality or reality, but they're one and the same principle. So he would have problems with, but he doesn't seem to have problems with, of course, the early Upanishads. He would, in his commentaries, quote all the time Upanishads and so on and so forth. We also know, of course, all the commentators have interpreted Upanishadic doctrines in their own line of tradition and so on and so forth. And Abhinava also, he has, of course, this small commentary on Gita, but he keeps quoting Upanishads all the time. He does see them as kind of potential source of Shaiva Advaitavada in his how he builds his own system. And another is a verse from one of Abhinavagupta's stotras where he says, Samsarostina tattvataha tanubhrutam bandasya vartayuka bando yasya na jatu tasya vidatha muktasya muktikriya nitya moha kradesha rajju bhujagachaya parichaya pishacha brahmo ma kinchit tyaja ma gruhana vihara. You have alternate reading sometimes as vihara or viraha. There are other alternate readings which I didn't note here. Swastho yatha stitaha. There is another, the first verse also has this last line, Na tyagi na parigrahi bhajasukham sarvam yatha vasthitah. I have a translation. If there are people who don't follow Sanskrit, I can just try to read. So the first verse, which I do not have, which I haven't projected here, the translation of that verse is, there is no need of spiritual progress, nor of contemplation, disputation or discussion, nor meditation, concentration, nor even the effort of prayer. Please tell me clearly, what is supreme truth? Listen, neither renounce nor possess anything. Share in the joy of the total reality, and be as you are, yatha vasthitah. The translation of this verse, samsarostina tattvataha, is, in reality, no world of transmigration exists. So how can one talk about humans in bondage? To try to liberate one from already is futile, for he was never in bondage. All this just creates a delusion like that of the shadow of a ghost or a rope mistaken for a snake. So neither renounce nor possess anything. Enjoy yourself freely, resting in yourself just as you are. The question is, from all this, what I want to derive is, the question is, what is Abhinava trying to justify from earlier verse, quoting from the Mahabharata in his Paratrishika? Why does he sound like a Shunyavadan? Or does he sound like a Shunyavadan at all? What is to be given up if nothing is attained at all? Mark the words swastho yatha vasthitah and sarvam yatha vasthitah, and that is what is swavidhi for Abhinava. There is no requirement for anything to be attained and no need to give up anything. The only requirement is to be rejoicing the joyful bliss, and that indeed is the activity or dynamic nature of all inclusiveness. Now here is another verse towards the end of this Malini Vijayavartika, and I only want to draw your attention, of course you can read the first three lines, but draw your attention towards the last pada. Yo yair deva upasyate swavidhina taiha tasya karya kriya. Here in Malini Vijayavartika, just again a footnote, he presents this as his verse. He does not refer anywhere that where is this verse coming from, because this is not his verse. That's why I am pointing it out. But in Malini Vijayavartika, it's just another verse in running in his text. It's only later that you see in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vivritti Vimarshini, which I'll show later, again we'll come back to this verse, that he refers and says that it is he makes a point and says that as has been said by Varaha Vihara. So we'll come to that later. I am reminded of another metaphor from Wittgenstein, who says, and I quote, "These books are ladders to be thrown away after you have climbed to the next level," unquote. When Abhinava repeatedly in his works quotes many of the earlier scriptures saying Gurutaha, Shastrataha, Swataha, of course he is offering importance to Swataha. And I want this Swataha also to be understood as bringing in our own rigor in interpreting Abhinavagupta. And that is Swavidhi. This also resonates with the Farsi poet Maulana Rumi, who would claim that the Quran is a step and we have to transcend that step in the ladder. If this will not be the case, we cannot be equipped to approach new ideas. We want these ideas should empower us by leading us back to a theorist's own texts and encouraging us to develop our own informed opinions. Exactly what Abhinavagupta himself would do. So the Deva Abhinavagupta is talking about, which I just mentioned some time back, who is to be recognized swabvidhina by following your own step or own process, is the self, who is not bereft of the potential other. तत्त्वे तत्त्वे स्वेच्छया देवदेवः सर्वां सर्वां भूमिमालम्बमानः पूर्णैकात्मा पूर्णसंवित् श्रीमान् शास्त्रे भैरवो निरुक्तः. Now, I don't know if there are scholars who don't follow Sanskrit, but I thought there would be mostly scholars who follow Sanskrit, so I didn't bother to translate. Also, it's time consuming and so on and so forth. But let's see here. Say, for instance, you see, I want to bring your attention when he's trying to create, every time in his works, you would see, he's trying to create a new category beyond this idea of subject and object, which he would very often name as Bhairava. As you would see, that he attributes is to Sriman Shastre. Here means the mother text, this main scripture that he's commenting on, which is Malani Vijaya Tantra, not Malani Vijaya Vartika. And he would say, on the basis of that, this is what Malani Vijaya says, Nirukta here, that. But you would see that he would always claim that, oh, I have not said anything beyond whatever is said in the mother scripture, that is Malani Vijaya Tantra, but every time he's evolving, and he's giving here almost his own definition of Bhairava. It is this Bhairava by oneness and manyness, and it is the super, or to say meta-Catholicism, by which I'm using these kind of loose categories, by which basically I mean his whole the science of autonomy. In other words, to say the Swatantriyavada, that his fundamental doctrinal principle of free will, which is represented by this idea of Vimarsha Shakti, the luminosity of the light idea, or the agency of the agent, of the subjecthood of the subject, or the otherness of the self, which is nothing but the other self, in other words. And it is the super or meta-Catholicism, the Swatantra of the agent, whose agency is equally manifest in both self and the other. So you would, again, I'm using another example, how he defines, say, for instance, the Paratantra idea. What does it mean, the idea of otherness, and so on and so forth. But I won't pick on that. Let me quickly, I don't have much time, but let me quickly jump on another page. My next two brief candidates to elaborate upon the Catholicity of style and interpretation are interdependent and interrelated. In the chapter 35 of the Tantraloka, Abhinava brings forth the concept of Shastra Melana, where he discusses Sarvagama Pramanya, offering supreme importance to the Agama Pramana. Now, in his scheme of epistemology, as you would understand, those who are familiar with the South Asian classical systems of philosophy, that you would, so his system has Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Shabda in the sense of Agama. And the supreme importance is always for the reasons that I will just briefly mention here, but that won't be doing justice to him, because his Agama Pramana is what he has discussed throughout his text, and he has created a robust epistemological model for Agama Pramana, and he believes very strongly that the Pratyaksha and Anumana, perception and inference, are basically something those eventually function under the larger canopy of Agama Pramana itself. Of course, Agama is important in Vedanta as well, and so on and so forth, but it needs to be thought and talked about also, that, you know, if Pratyabhijna category is what epistemologically he is wanting to create as a very robust category of his system, what is the role of that? If Pratyabhijna is not Pramana, then what is Pratyabhijna doing? Apart from all these three categories, those are standard categories, and why does he do what he's doing, and how does he do it, and so on and so forth. In the chapter 35 of the Tantra Loka, Abhinava brings forth the concept of Shastra Mirana, where he discusses Sarvagama Pramanya, offering the supreme importance to the Agama Pramana. But this interpretation is not excluding any of the Agamas belonging to non-Shaiva traditions, but is inclusive of all of them. And it is in the same context that the concept of prasiddhi, or established well-known usage, is also brought into in support of his argument. Let's go back to the example that Abhinav noted in the Malini Vijaya Vartika, which I just referred some time back, which was in the Malini Vijaya Vartika. Unlike in the Malini Vijaya Vartika, where we get an impression that this verse is composed by Abhinava, in the Ishvara Pratyabhijna Vivritti Vimarshini, he clearly and sincerely attributes this verse to Varahamihara. And what you read here, for instance, this is the first line, is the prose line, and you can see that same exactly verse. He says very clearly, Yathaha Varaha Mihiraha. And the prose line up there, the Mahajana here means Apya, the one who is a credible person. Of course, there are lots of definitions he himself would give to who constitutes of a credible person. Why is it that credible person's, for instance, word can become an agama, for instance? Those all discussions are there in his text, for instance. But what I want you to just observe is that he would give an example and say that here you would have prasiddhi idea. For instance, he says kartavye yaha prasiddhim yato vargaha, and then he gives example like, for instance, the Vedics, the ones who follow Veda, for instance, they do when they do ritual, the Vedic ritual, and when the Vaishnavas do their ritual and so on and so forth, what they follow. Why do they follow what they follow? That prasiddhi, it's all under the rubric of Agama. What he wants to say is that actually what they are also doing and saying is basically nothing but this universal, because he wants to create a universal platform for this prasiddhi. He wants to create, from one point of view, if you want to say it is Shaiva prasiddhi, that is exactly the case. But beyond that, he wants to create this prasiddhi idea, this agama category, as a universal category. That's what I mean to say. Here you can see that in order to explain the agama pramana in Shaiva Advaitavada, he offers examples of the followers of the Vedas and the Vaishnavas. And there are a large number of examples in the texts of Abhinava that give us the impression that he wants to see everyone as Shaiva. And this is where inclusivism may become problematic. Imagine as if you are told that all religions of the world are basically Hindu, or all the philosophical traditions are one. Well, of course they are not. Then what is Abhinava meaning to say? Abhinava is creating a method, an abstract universal method that we should explore. Is it universally applicable or not? I will bring this forth with two other very short examples that should further help me elaborate what I mean by the Catholicity of approach of Abhinava. You will see that Abhinava is dealing with a large number of challenges while interpreting earlier scriptures. And for him, scriptural discrepancies may be allowed for as far as the valid performance of ritual prescribed by scriptural revelation is concerned. But there should be unanimity at the doctrinal level. So whatever happens, say in terms of he justifying the earlier scriptures and trying to kind of rationalize their ritual or ritualness or the methods they are proposing, but every time he's theorizing them. Every time you would see that, say, for Tantra Loka is full of that. You have latter parts in the chapters which are full of those ritual acts, what is to be done and what is not to be done, the Vidhi Nisheda ideas. But the earlier parts usually are a very strong philosophical justification that why this idea at all has to be justified or should be taken into consideration. And there he invokes many times Naiyayikas, Buddhists, Vaisheshikas, Sankhyawadins. There are lots of examples of that. The job of a traditional commentator like Abhinavagupta was to draw attention away from inconsistencies, at least at the intellectual level, at the scriptural level, and to emphasize the doctrinal harmony of Shaiva scriptures. That all the Shaiva scriptures are basically talking the same thing. So his effort is that you can see that. See, from one point of view, he is doing that locally. By locally, I mean to say that he is doing that internal to his camp, to say that he is doing that with the dualistic scriptures. He is bringing all of them and trying to kind of revise them, revise models of. See, one example I have in my head is the Tattva Krama, how he tries to create a very standard model of all, I mean, getting away with all the earlier discrepancies of the Krama, of the certain ontological hierarchy system that all the Shaivas earlier followed, for instance, right? The job of a traditional commentator like Abhinava was to draw attention away from inconsistencies and to emphasize the doctrinal harmony of Shaiva scriptures. This was indeed a challenging task. Even though Abhinava and other post-scriptural commentators would maintain the doctrinal unity of the Shaiva canon, this was not always the case. For example, the sequence, krama, of the emergence of the tattvas was one such area that required careful hermeneutical attention. And it is very important to observe how Abhinavagupta and his commentator Jayaratha addresses these questions. The other short example may be coming from poetics. Now, since there's no much time, I haven't given other examples, and so I tried to give examples and text quotations from some earlier parts, but I'll just read out a couple of more paragraphs and then we can have a discussion. But this is just to justify my take on the Samanvaya idea, that the Catholicity idea that he has. The other short example may be coming from poetics. I have argued at several platforms that the potentiality of the idea of creativity as defined by Abhinava in the South Asian context lies in its open-endedness. I do not only mean that such has been the case with South Asian poetics in its history alone. What I also mean is that the most important level of creativity that is exercised through our approach and methodology fundamentally lies in this open-endedness. If there is a definition of creativity, as both Ananda and Abhinava might posit, then how can it be called creativity at all? Defining means creating limitations, while creativity should have none. To take a cue from Abhinava himself, and radically so, the definition of creativity is that there is no definition of creativity. It can only be defined in as many ways as one can. And there is where the potentiality of the creativeness is. This is what is the Catholicity of creativity, at least I have got it, using different words, i.e. establishing an ontological status of something that status of something that is to create and that is to, sorry, there is some grammatical discrepancy here. Establishing an ontological status of something that otherwise doesn't seem to have a status as such, like an oxymoron, but is that oxymoron or an element which signifies non-existence, is it possible to give it an ontological status? That is the whole idea. And what must be thought further is that if the categories created by Abhinava can be read in alignment with the world literature, for instance, i.e. can the principles of rasa, etc. be universally evaluated and interpreted? My last example is to exhibit the Catholicity of adhikari. Remember, we are dealing with a very strong form of non-dualist system. So the question of adhikari bheda should be important. Who is the one who Abhinava considers fit to approach this non-dual system? The answer is whosoever approaches it. Abhinava and his master Utpala have strongly argued for categories of compassion, altruism, empathy with respect to the process of othering the self, selfing the other. To use this phrase from Arindam Chakravarti. As Isabel Rathier says, and I quote her, from the point of view of the Pratyabhijna philosophers, otherness is not only a problem as regards the way we become aware of others' presence, nor only regards the way we can consider that we share perceived objects with other perceiving subjects. For whether from the Vijnanavadins or from Pratyabhijna's perspective, the question of otherness is linked to that of Karuna, Kripa, compassion. In fact, for Abhinava, now I just had 3 quotations. I mean, there are others I had created, but there is no point bringing all of them here together. And just to give a taste of what I mean to say, in fact, for Abhinava, only an incomplete person, that is kind of literal translation of this, the first line, apurna eva hi swatmanam, only an incomplete person, driven by the urge, and what kind of urge? Let me accumulate from all sides. And it is same kind of urge that harms the other, or does not do good to the other. Hence, he is supposed to be a wicked person. Tato durjanaha. Or to argue that his project is entirely altruistic, as much as it is aesthetic project as well, and I can argue for that. This is not the time, but there is a separate platform needed for that. His whole project is an aesthetic project, whether it is Pratyabhijna Shastra, whether it is Tantra Loka, whether it is across the disciplines that he's writing. Or to argue that his project is entirely altruistic when he says, and that's the translation of this second Tantra Loka line, one's only visible duty remains welfare of the mankind. Or where the very concept of absolute anuttara is defined as, again, the translation of the last one definition given for anuttara is the component signifying ultimate reality that indicates primacy of abstract sense. The absolute is that where there is no superiority, inferiority, as in the division Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and the one of the lowest birth. I should further explain this using the language of Professor Pradeep Gokhale, and I quote, but in this process of correlating the two systems, one is likely to ignore the important difference between the Vedic tradition and the Agamic one, which is essentially social. The Vedic tradition is rooted in and supported by the views of the upper caste men, whereas the Tantric Agamic tradition is rooted in and supported by common people's religious practices. Of course, this quotation can be, this quotation from Professor Gokhale can be talked upon, and one can have a little more detail whether what he's saying, what sense does it make, and so on and so forth. But largely, I see sense in this quotation. And I continue reading his text. As it is said in Tantra Loka Viveka, systems such as the Vedic system emphasize differences, bheda, whereas systems such as Shaivism emphasize non-difference, abheda. The term bheda here refers not only to difference but also to a discriminatory and hierarchical social approach. The Vedic tradition accepts the hierarchical social structure consisting of 4 varnas. The hierarchy of 4 varnas was further complicated by the caste system and gender discrimination. The discriminatory social order had religious and sociological implications. As against this, the Tantric/Agamic tradition, generally speaking, opened the path of emancipation to all irrespective of caste and gender. In his discussion of the path to liberation, Abhinavagupta does not discriminate in terms of caste or gender directly or indirectly. So that's end of the Professor Gokhale's quotation. I often tell my students that the Advaita system of Abhinavagupta is like this lofty edifice, like this huge bricks are adopted from the dualistic Shaiva Siddhanta. The architectural principles are from Buddhists. Sand and other raw materials have been used from Mimamsa, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya. But the cement that is holding the whole edifice together is Shaiva cement of principle of ubiquity, of variegatedness. So with that, I'll stop. I have already taken, I think, around about 55 minutes, but maybe we can just have a little bit talk or discussion. So thank you so much once again, Professor Sundareshwaran, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Mrinal Kaul, for the beautiful and clear presentation. Friends, it's now time for intervention and interaction. Actually, Mrinal has provoked right from his introductory remarks and this proclamation, Vijñātārastu Durlabhaha. Now, it is our dharma to show that we are provoked. Whether your idea is silly, trivial, serious, philosophical, whatever it be, feel free to ask. Language should not be a barrier. Please.
And sir, with your permission, if I may add,
Yes.
Since I know enough the Kerala scene and the students, I have interacted with so many of them in Calicut, in Kaladi, and different places. If there are questions or queries you think you can better articulate in Malayalam, you can go ahead, or in Sanskrit, please go ahead. Professor Sundareshwaran can help us. So don't have any hesitation of you won't be able to put your question across. It would be stupid question. We all are asking stupid questions all the time, but meaning comes out of the stupidity. So if you have something to share rather also about what I said, it would be nice.
When myself and Professor Mrinal make an appeal to students, not that scholars should not intervene. Scholars are welcome to air their views and comments. Professor Naresh Kirti is there. Professor Neelakanthan Aled is there. Many others are there. So all are welcome. Feel free, please.
If I may, sir. Mrinal, thank you. This was very rich and very stimulating, even for someone like me who's so far from the daunting philosophy of it. Can you tell us something about what may be different between, say, the kind of multi-perspectival view that the Jainas kind of teach us to do, this kind of anekantavada, and the within tradition Catholicity that you're finding in this very specific practice of Abhinava and commentary. And superficially it may be tempting to kind of put all of this in the same box, but clearly there is a systematic difference. And could you tell us a bit about that?
Thanks, Naresh. That's in a sense important question, but see, I'm not well aware as far as the Jaina doctrines are concerned. I mean, I know the basic stuff there. One reason for that is also that I am aware that Abhinava's system and, for instance, Jaina system, but I would say also, I have always found that Advaita of Ramanuja sounds much more closer in terms of its doctrines and so on and so forth to Abhinava. But as far as Abhinava himself is concerned, of course, Ramanuja is later and so on and so forth. He doesn't seem ever to interact with Jainas. um, in the text that I am aware of, and those it never. I mean, that's a historical point of view that it never comes. I never come across that. Mostly, it's only the Buddhists. However, I think the most important point is, I think what you're referring to largely is that what also has been not only my problem, but to think in terms. Now, I'll speak like sort of my mind aloud. Say, for instance, if we look at the idea of self proposed forth by someone like Udayana in the Atma Tattva Videka. Now, he's a Nayayika from a realist point of view. His idea of self and so on and so forth, how he kind of resurrects the whole idea what self should mean for Nayayika and so on and so forth. We have, of course, much later the Dvaitavada coming in terms of Madhva. I want some point of time to put them in dialogue. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean to say, let's hypothesize that Abhinava came after Madhva, and if someone like Abhinava, unlike say Madhusudana has done with Ananda Tirtha, but if Abhinava would have been post Madhva, then how would he have responded to the arguments proposed forth by the dualistic tradition? Right? Now, for that, we have to. One fundamental problem is that what we often do, and I am using here sort of this larger idea from Professor Raghuram Raju, who keeps saying in all his writings, is that we cannot be working with raw material as raw material. These things, and that's why my emphasis, this example was a just very, in a sense, also silly example what I presented, but as a scholastic idea. But more, I wanted to invigorate or give an example to students in terms of how can they engage with these different traditions, theories, ideas, and so on and so forth. So for that, one has to prepare all this body. So there is Abhinavagupta text, there is translation, there is X, there is Y, but we have to first learn to engage with them, interpret them, in order for us to bring them on the table for discussion with, when I use, say, for instance, a term world literature, world philosophy, but from one point of view, these are like, bizarre categories. But from another point of view, this whole idea of not doing comparative philosophy, what I keep saying, but doing a meaningful comparison between X and Y, for instance. That's something fundamentally important. And for that, one needs also that hypothetical creativity that, okay, if Ramanuja would have talked to Abhinava, for instance, and Abhinava would have lots of these radical views that many of these Vaishnavas and so on and so forth would not agree to. He at times would come as sort of come across as a heretic, right? So how do we understand these ideas, and how do we make sense of them, and how do we then ourselves bring creativity, forth on the table by our own discussions? And so this multiple approach point of view is, as you said, in terms of Jaina, sorry, I can't come to that point, but this multiple point of view has been always the strength of like Sanskritic tradition, intellectual tradition, I would say. I'm sure you would agree with me on that.
Yes, thank you. I think also this point you just made about setting up these thought experiments. It's a very productive approach if at all one wants to take Indian philosophy and make it more than the study of these intellectual fossils, but to make it a kind of player in world philosophy. And of course, I think, and if you look a bit in some detail, we will see that already this is perhaps done in the tradition that and your idea of setting up Madhva in conversation with Abhinava, or you said Abhinava in conversation with Madhva, but also why not? Why not an intellectual legatee of Madhva speaking? To me, it has always been this surprising kind of silence about how all the Vedanta schools kind of snub Kashmira Vedanta by themselves. I would be happy even if they fought with them, but they just choose not to engage. And you said this about the Ramanuja school, and it totally makes sense because, after all, Pancharatra derives so much from the Shaivatantra of Kashmir, and perhaps it's a project for you to do.
So you've already given me a project. I have so many already. Thank you. Thanks, Naresh.
Thank you for the response. Yeah.
Now I have got 2-3 questions.
Please, sir.
Do you please explain the concept of Swabhava and Tattva Karma? Swabhava,
Right.
very often and many other iterations, literary theories, Swabhava. What does it mean actually?
From
And
one point.
Tattva Karma also.
Sorry. Sure. Sir, as you know, from one point of view, from literary point of view, by word meaning point of view, essential nature of something, as we all know. Now, Swabhava becomes, from philosophical point of view, important in this system because one, I won't go into the epistemological discussion in terms of how, for instance, essential property of being something what it is, how Dharmakirti understands and the whole Pramana tradition understands and what the argument is from Abhinava's point of view. But from very metaphysical point of view, to understand this relationship, I mean, if there is at all this idea of relationship between Prakasha and Vimarsha, Swabhava is nothing but Vimarsha Shakti. Say, Prakasha has as its essential nature the Vimarsha. Now, these two categories can be very easily understood. I think the example very often I give of the light and the luminosity. The light, and by light I do not mean the source of light, like a sun or the moon or the bulb that we have, tube light or something. No, just share the light idea and the property of light that wherever it goes, it shines forth. That's why this abhasa idea, asamantat bhati iti, that's the meaning, for instance, that abhasa, that's why the Shaiva system is whole about this abhasa theory, that like the vyakti idea, I abhivyakta, I am because I'm manifest, or this is this idea is, this object is, this category is because it is manifest, and manifest is the being manifest is the only reality. So these two categories, they are inseparable categories, but yet we talk of them for the sake of talking in terms of Prakash and Vimarsha, but they are just one and the same thing basically, the light and luminosity. So Swabhava here, the essential property of being of Prakasha is Vimarsha, but Vimarsha idea is something more dynamic. In other words, how say for instance the example I can also give from Nayayika's point of view, there is say Devadattaha Odanam Pachati. Now when I say this statement, for instance, that Odana, that cooking of rice, for instance, for Devadatta is not when you say Odanatvam Pachati, he cannot be cooking the universal category of rice. Devadatta cannot cook. When he has to cook rice for satisfying his stomach, he cannot cook the all rice of the world. So one is this universal. So it is exactly like Nyaya category, universal and particular, Samanya and Vishesha. It bring Samanya to the level of Vishesha that you can cook rice. So, in other words, what I mean to say, the agency, the Kriya is possible of so these two Shaktis that they talk about, the Jnana Shakti and Kriya Shakti. Kriya Shakti is possible only at that level of Vishesh. You cannot cook the universal food, but you can cook this food here in front of me in my kitchen that I can eat. I cannot be eating all rice in the world. I cannot be cooking all rice in the world. So that activity, the dynamism is possible, the functionality of it is possible. It is universal at the same time. But the functionality of at certain level, at empirical level, is possible only at a very, very particular level. So that's one Swabhava. Tattva Krama is simply the idea that we also know from these champions of ontology in classical Indian philosophy of the Sankhya-Vadins. Sankhya-Vadins have managed in the course of time and history to create a certain standard model of the tattvas, and largely there are no disputes, at least later, or of this, what comes out of what. Of course, that's why the causality is important, the causality principle. This is why, so to add one more footnote to it, is that largely the Dvaitavadins, Shaiva Dvaitavadins and Shaiva Advaitavadins, they both agree with the model of the Sankhya-Vadins, of the tattvas, the 25 and so on and so forth, but they add to them another layer, that is 11 more tattvas, and calling the earlier Sankhya model the Ashuddha Advan, the impure path, and latter, that is to say, what they add to it, 11 more tattvas in terms of the Shuddha Advan, the pure path. But throughout, so we also have to be mindful of this fact that the Dvaitavadins, the Shaiva Siddhantins, how have they imbibed in their agamas or tantras, what have been their sources of imbibing these tattvas into their system? Where are they getting these models from? Now, in the scriptural tradition, earlier scriptural tradition, we see a lot of inconsistencies in krama. So what came from what, whether the one tattva came from another tattva, and another discussion, say in the model mostly that Abhinavagupta follows is on the basis of Matanga Parameshwara. But of course he quotes Kirana, he quotes Sarda Drishati Kalottara, and he tells you there, in fact his commentator there has a long commentary there in the Tantra Loka 9 saying that, giving all these inconsistencies that one Tantra says this, one Tantra says this, nowhere the krama, and remember krama is very important because of that a lot of causality issues, philosophical causality issues can be created. So what Abhinava does is that he standardizes that sequence of what comes of what comes of what on very strong rational basis. That if you say that raga is coming from, let's say, kala is coming from X, Y, and so on and so forth, what is the rationale behind that? That very strongly, for first almost 100 verses, he establishes Karyakarana Bhava, Shaiva Karyakarana Bhava he establishes. And then he talks about this, each tattva being an evolute of one another, so that chain idea that they have, that they're all depending on each other for the evolution. Then he goes on to define that, and he standardizes, at least in the Shaiva Trika system, that is kind of his very local system of Shaiva Advaitavad. I hope that's a little bit clear.
Yeah, it's clear.
Thanks.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful lecture. And I have a query. As you said that Pratyavika is not a pramana. So, is that a
elaborate that question. That is to say, for instance, for me, it's so difficult to put together this hermeneutic exercise across many textual traditions, across many say aesthetic traditions, say Kula and Krama tradition, say Pratyabhijna tradition. That Abhinava is across the board contributing, and he has unspoken and unseen connections here. And there is where his whole, approaching him and understanding him in alignment with each other of these traditions becomes a very difficult exercise. Because you can very easily say, for instance, I'll tell you my example. Sorry if I'm elaborating a bit. There was a point of time when I started trying to understand the Shaiva points of view and so on and so forth, I had no idea of his aesthetic world. Now, when I started, after that background, when I started approaching and understanding his aesthetic world, and then every time I would come back to all those interpretations I was understanding in the light of the Shaiva doctrines, which was not essentially a bad exercise, but it was let's say metaphysical heavy. So I was seeing less of aesthetic concerns, larger of metaphysical concerns, which are there embedded in each other. But that unpacking of those ideas and those relationships that you have is something very complicated always in his system, at least, because that's what I'm familiar with. Now, this Pratyabhigyana category, why he creates it, what exactly is it, and so on and so forth. From why is it not a pramana? See, if you ask the question largely, which I was asked once by someone, saying that does his system believe in? These are very complicated ideas. No, believe in. If his system believes in swataha pramanya or parataha pramanya. Now, from one fundamental point of view, it is swataha pramanya. But from another point of view, I wouldn't straightforwardly answer this question. It is swataha pramanya only, because what is the whole idea of para in his system? Because then otherwise you're creating this dichotomy in swataha parataha. From one point of view, objective type information, yes, it is swataha. But from another point of view, where does parataha go? What is the parataha pramanya of the pramana? So the same way you have his system of pramana is there to create a model in order for him to counter Buddhists. That's why the whole Ishvara Pratyabhijna is written in the style of Pararthanumana to counter the Buddhists. But from another point of view, you can ask that what is the need of, you can ask that to Vedantins also, no? What is the need of pramana you have? If everything is Svataha Siddha, why do you need pramanas? So very strategically, that's why he doesn't create. So Pratyabhijna category is a rather, if you are a little bit familiar with the aesthetic world, it's more like rasa category. It's more like a phenomenological category. It's just a category which is dependent on nothing but manifestation. That's it. It manifests, and the manifestation alone is its reality. You can't say that, oh, there is ayam gataha, gate pratiyogita, gatanishta pratiyogitve sati tatra avachedaka. That doesn't, from one point of view, that doesn't work, right? When you talk of the mind idea, I don't know exactly what you mean by that here. See, mind in English, of course, is a very complicated category. Do we mean manas? Do we mean the samvit idea in terms of consciousness, for instance, that we loosely translate? So pratyabhignana is nothing but, because see, jnana is swatah siddha, it's already there. Every time when I know things, it is that I am re-knowing. It is never the case that you don't know. That is why his theory of error, for instance, if you see that akhyati there means apurna khyati, you have only limited knowledge of idea. The limited becomes complete. That's all. That's exactly what the pratyabhijna idea does. You have jnana, which is limited idea, and then you have pratyabhijna, the counter idea, I know you. That's why the functionality of the ideas of memory, the action, apoha, and so on and so forth, those will play a fundamental role in this idea of cognition and recognition. What we mean by that. I mean, one can speak, open up and speak more on that, but I think largely, if it was clear.
Thank you, sir. So, can we say that it is a realization or a rejoinment with ubiquitous?
Now, see, realization, what does realization mean? If you are talking of realization in terms of recognition, then I accept that's what it means. Because again, this realization word is very complicated. We realize, what do you mean by if you are referring in structure to with the prati and so on and so forth, that we re-know and have the understanding of the self. But remember that understanding of the self is not bereft of the understanding of the other. That cannot be. Of course, it's a problem of part and whole. Whether by knowing only one page of the book, am I knowing the whole book, or whether by knowing only the let's say the leg of a chair, am I knowing the whole leg, and so on and so forth. This problem has plagued Nayayikas, this problem has plagued Vedantins, this problem has plagued, of course, the Shaivas. I mean, they have their answers, because from one point of view, there are no paths. There is no path, but there are limitations. There is kinchit jnana, for instance. That's why they refer to the ajnana idea by kinchit jnana. Yes, you don't know everything, but it is not that you don't know everything. You always know everything. It is just because you are under the spell of what in their system they would call the sheets, the kanchukas, and so on and so forth. So they create their own system on the basis of these earlier agamas and stuff, which is followed, of course, in the Pratyabhijna Shastra as well, from a epistemological point of view. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
No problem.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, Ajitan. Hello, Ajitan. How are you?
I'm fine. Happy to see you here. I have two or
I
three
can't
doubts.
see you, but happy to hear you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll show my face while I offer a lot of time.
No problem.
Okay. First, Sundaresh sir has asked a doubt regarding the Swabhava. Avadhuta Muni, in his commentary on Bodha Panchadashika, says Atmanuyayi Anyanuyayi Atma Bhudashta Bhavaha, that which permeates to every being, and Atma Bhudaha, something that is within you. So Swabhava means it is within you, at the same time it permeates to all beings. Anuyayi Atma Bhudashta Bhavaha. And my first question is regarding the title of your presentation itself. You said there is a difference between Catholic, small letter, and capital letter. What is the difference between small letter and capital letter?
That is okay. So should I answer that question first?
Yeah.
Then we can go. So that's like more dictionary idea. For instance, that if you basically I'm playing with words to create my idea. That's the idea. So if you saw the first slide, I had verbatim given the dictionary meanings. If you are using Catholic with small c, of course as an adjective, The Catholicity means, see, if I say Mrinal is a man of Catholic tastes, it means I'm a man of many different tastes. I have varied tastes and so on and so forth. That's literal, the Shabdika Artha, simply. Of course, same adjectival usage, if it is used for the Roman Catholic Church, we usually refer to that with C capital. If I have to signify in my English writing that I mean Mrinal is a Catholic, then it would refer to, I would usually refer it by capital C. It's like you would write, say, Islam, for instance, or Hindu, for instance, capital H or capital I, and so on and so forth. So that's more like dictionary thing.
So, okay.
Shall I interrupt to add to Vijay's another statement or question? He has been quoting a passage from Bhagavantatishka commentary. After hearing that, this question comes. Can I say that Prakasha and Vimarsha are to be and the urge to manifest? Can I say like that?
Say it again, sir.
Prakasha is the concept of to be, and Vimarsha is the urge to manifest. Can I say like that?
Well, you can't say to be, because if you are saying to be, then it might have this implication of future, that it was not in the past, it is not in the present. If you say just capital B, then just be, the being of things.
Yes, be.
Yes.
That's
And the
exactly what I
urge,
meant.
exactly. But that's exactly what it is. That whole Spanda Shastra, the whole kind of this, the Shakti and Shaktimat, the whole idea of the locus and what is on the locus, for instance. The relationship between them. Basically, there is no relationship between them because they are the same thing. You can never say the luminosity comes out of light.
Okay, what about the other part? Prakasha being the urge to manifest.
The
Whether I
urge
be
to
correct to say
manifest,
that?
Prakasha's urge to manifest is that Ichha Shakti which comes forth. So it's something like, say, if you just to add to that, for instance, one, of course, there are so many metaphors and examples and so on and so forth. So in Tantra Loka 3, for instance, in this Paramarshodaya Krama, again Krama here, that Abhinavagupta gives this example of that there is, of course, one reality from the Paramarsha Udaya in the sense of this Varnodaya Krama. There's only one reality, which is which of course is Anuttara in his system. So is like a Samputa Bijakara, and it has to her everything encapsulated within it. But her doesn't even need to be there. It's only So at one point of time, now one can easily misunderstand it also from Vedantic point of view, but one should not slip there so easily. So at one point of time, because unlike Brahman, it has its own rejoice, which is dormant in it. It's not even dormant, but it is always there. It's just a matter of manifestation. So is overflowing. That's why the overflowing idea is the idea of Purnatva, the Purnata. It is, that's why the Purnata idea becomes a fundamental concept both in aesthetics and the Shaiva metaphysical world. It is overflowing with joy and it doesn't know what to do with it now. So is overflowing with joy and it is wanting to become two. And there is Paratarshika Vivarna. I was looking, I have missed the page, but I can tell you exactly where it says that also there. So gets in Samvadana, conversation with its own reflective awareness, with its own other, which is not other from it. So they, for the sake of manifestation, they become two. So now is in conversation with and it basically looks at its own self in its own reflective medium. So you have basically
so Samvadana means something related to othering the self and selfing the other.
Exactly. But the other is not something different
Yes,
from
yes,
you or out.
yes.
So
Other
you
is one's own part. One's own.
Exactly. One's own self. It is just the other self, you can see. And Vedantins also have a wonderful explanation. Later you have, I think, the Padmapada and so on and so forth. They also give this wonderful explanation of the Pratibhimbavad. But here, for instance, you have falling in love with that is to say itself. It is not narcissistic idea. It is not solipsistic idea. And it combines then within its own self to create Ago Savarne Dirgha. Then to have plus becoming you create another swara out of it, which is basically nothing, but it is encapsulated in itself. So, from one point of view, of course, we see two yes, they create the long letter and so on and so forth. But it is just it is just like slightly detached, not even detached. These are words which are difficult. It is just manifesting form of itself. Just in its very active, very provocative form, very spandayamana yukta ritya, in that form. Like spandanam chikinchit chalanam, that chalana, that vibrating transformation that you have, slightly in a sense in dormant, it becomes active. And that's how you have this urge of it's like in the aesthetic world. Say for instance, I am a poet, and what value do I have if there are no listeners? Say for instance, I am the only, like that Manu, no, I am the only person in the whole universe, and I write poetry. Now there is no one to listen to my poetry, there is no one to appreciate my poetry. I am the writer, I am the listener, and there is nothing happening in terms of this samvadana, the interaction and so on and so forth. And Bharatrishika has beautiful that whole idea where he complicates the whole idea of question and answer. Who is questioning and who is answering. So from one point of view, when Shakti is asking the question, that is Shiva's own self asking the question to himself, but in a reflective mode. Agatam Shivavaktra tu gatam cha girijanani. That's how the whole Agama definition and stuff from Swayambhu Agama and others, it is there. Sorry, I keep speaking without...
Okay, my next question is regarding Adhikari. You said what Abhinavagupta...
Ajitan, can I just make one more comment? You said about this Avaduta Muni's... It incidentally, it happens that right now I'm editing that text for this other minor works of Abhinavagupta I have. So I came across that some years back, and this the one Mula is there in, I think, Madras, and then there is this transcript on Mukta Bodha. Of course, it reads, many parts of it read very bizarre. It tries to be very shastric, but there are parts which are very, very reading very complicatedly bizarre. He's trying to make sense. You understand what's going on, and then I discovered it's like some Avaduta Muni. In fact, Abhinavagupta several times, he quotes some Avaduta Muni, but I don't know if it can't be the same Avaduta Muni, because he's writing this commentary on this Prabodha Panchadashika, perhaps earlier name and stuff. So that's interesting. I'll be in touch with you.
He may not be a pre-Abhinavagupta, because he quotes several verses from Ishvara Pratibhijna, Kariba, etc. And even some of Abhinavagupta's citations.
Yes, exactly. So there are, as you know, there are many Avadutas, I'm sure. So some Avaduta Abhinavagupta quotes himself. I have seen in Vimarshini and other places. He himself quotes Yathoktam Avaduta Munna. So who is that? Of course, someone else. And Then there is this Avaduta who is clearly mentioned in the
He also mentions a work written by him, that Trikadarshan.
Yes.
There is only a reference to the text in Catalogos, but the text is not found anywhere.
Exactly.
And my next question is regarding Adhikari. You said Abhinavagupta was saying that the Shastra is for all. But I have a doubt regarding this statement that everywhere, if you look at Tandraloka or Paratrimsi or Dharna, everywhere, it is said that Shaktipada is the prerequisite. And I will quote Jayaratha also. In Tandraloka 13th chapter, 13th Anya, he says, Nahi Ishvara Shaktipada Mandarena Tad Viveka Jnanameva Dutiyad Iti Tan Nivittayaha Mukterapi Ko Avasaraha. This is just one statement. You will find such statements everywhere in Tandraloka, in commentaries and in texts and commentaries and in Paramrishya. So Shaktipada is the base, one of the basic prerequisite to enter into the world of the Shastra. Then how you say this is for all, Abhinavagupta and so? That is
no. See what I mean by that, it is understood that Shaktipada is something, an exception to the rule. Now Shaktipada doesn't have Shaktipada, of course, even if it is of some 13 kinds and Tivra Madhya, Madhya Tivra and so on and so forth, there are all these kinds. But even then, Shaktipada is not something for which you need to cultivate anything. It's something like that can happen, as he would say himself somewhere. It can happen to anyone, any point of time, anywhere. Whether I have read even any part of Shastra, I may not even never know who Abhinavagupta was, what Shaiva Shastra or any Shastra was and stuff. It can still happen. There is where, see, Shaktipada is something that is to be connected with this idea of altruism as well, the whole idea of Karuna and Bhakti and so on and so forth, that is to be connected with that. Even for that matter, say, because this is, one is that from a very factual point of view, what we understand from the texts. Another is that I think there is an important need, maybe people have done that. Chris Wallace had, I think, his thesis on that. I haven't read that carefully. When we say this patana of the Shakti, what do we really mean by that? Okay, we call it grace. Largely, yes, it's clear that, okay, there is some kind of this intervention, there is grace and so on and so forth. And it's also clear that it is an exception to the rule, for instance. And that's also fine. But the idea of Gurutaha, Shastrataha, Swataha follows a certain krama. So Shastra is for all. What I meant by that is that anybody can read Shastra. Whether you understand or not is a different thing. Whether you follow or not is a different thing. So you can follow also Shastra, you can follow Guru, and you may have even Swataha, your own realization and so on and so forth. But unless, of course, the exception to the rule, as I said, unless you have the Shaktipada idea, nothing is going to ever take place. I think that part is very clear.
And at another place, when he says Gurutaha, Shastrataha, Sutaha, I think what he meant is that you need to have a guru. So,
Right.
Yeah. Without guru, you cannot enter into the Shastra, because the role of guru is to lead to the Shastra. That is why Gurutaha. That is how Vedatha interprets Gurutaha. Guru is someone who leads you to the Shastra, and Shastra leads you to the Nirvikalpa state or the state or experience, real experience, whatever. And my other doubt is, you said Abhinavagupta is all inclusive. That is what his view is.
Mm-hmm.
Am I audible, clear?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's what I said. Yeah. That is my take on him.
Yeah. But I have doubt regarding that too, because whenever he confronts with the Vaishnavas, he does not spare them. He often levels big criticism against them, and I will show you one example from Tandraloka. He says, Teneha Vaishnavadinam Nadhikaraha Kathanjana Tehi Bhedaikavrittikvad Abhede Duravartidaha. This is just one instance. And
There
in
are-
Advaita, yeah.
There are so many
does not
examples.
spare Vaishnavas, then how he can be all?
No, see, Ajitan, I am trying to interpret Abhinava not in the historical sense. Remember that. That's very important to understand. Of course, all these examples, I have all of them in front of me. And that is one, and I want to say that that's another side of his Catholicity. That while, of course, not sparing, say for instance, we know he's not sparing Buddhists in Ishwar Pratya, that's the whole text is against the Buddhists. And that vada you have to create, you are having all the time with discussions and so on and so forth. But the point is, why does he do that? Is he doing that not to tell them like, okay, you are included in what I am saying? You understand the point? And it is not something that Abhinava alone does for that matter. That's why I was trying to bring in all these points. This was one of my points, but I didn't read that ahead, the 2-3 fewer pages, because I ran out of time. But that I want to understand that criticism also as all-inclusive. Because by criticizing and taking them to task, you are overpowering them and trying to tell them, wait, what you are saying basically is, in another words, exactly what I am saying. It is just simply that you have to accept one more principle of what I am saying. This is exactly what he would tell, to Buddhists, to Nayayikas, to many others. You accept this more principle and that's how you're going ahead. You are basically a Shaiva Advaitin. Right? From very strictly historical point of view, you can always criticize and you can say, no, that is not the case. These are all examples, completely, absolutely. And that's why the word or the system is Shaiva, Shaiva means that he is adhering to a certain world view, certain view of interpretation and so on and so forth. So he is not Vaishnava Advaita or Shakta Advaita, even though of course, as you know very well, better than me, that is the whole Shaiva is basically his Shakta Shaivism. But it is not called Shaiva, Shakta Advaita Vada and so on and so forth. But can you take away all the Shakta elements, then there is no Shaiva Advaita Vada at all. The whole Krama is the Shakta, but Shaktaized Shaiva. And there are elements you would see. See, it's also important to understand, say for instance, that's why I gave, towards the end I gave this example, is how much is he, taking in interpreting and constructing, or rather resurrecting from his own system, from these others, as again, it's not anything unique, as all of them do. But of course, at Abhinava's own time, he is so prolific in kind of encapsulating these ideas from, if you take out the whole Pramana Shastra from his system, what will remain of the Pratyabhijna Shastra? Almost nothing. So that's why the method, for instance, where some point of time, some article I wrote, what he is doing is basically taking Buddhists. I mean, he is taking just nothing but their argument and shooting their argument at them, just using his own gun. So he's just taking their bullet and shooting back at them, for instance. But the only difference is that he's using his own gun, or if you want to use other metaphors, the Shaiva gun. The bullet is the same. Right? So all these elements, because historically, again speaking, we don't know how much of the Vaishnava influence, because we don't have many sources and so on and so forth. But if we read Vamana and so many others, there are big influences of Vaishnava system at that point of time, and I'm sure that he was influenced by a lot of these Vaishnavas as well at the same time. But getting influenced and having your system as much as made of these other doctrines and so on and so forth, means that you have to just strengthen the argument. Otherwise, the content you have in Abhinavagupta, I mean, from Shaiva point of view, it's all made of Siddhanta. If you take out all Siddhanta dualist Shaivism from Abhinavagupta, what will remain there? The whole Tantra Loka, it's based on Malini Vijaya. Malini Vijaya is supposed to be, at least attributed to be, a dualistic Tantra from one point of view. And then Swachanda is converted, Netra is converted, dualistic Tantra, they were converted by Kshemarada. He says that very clearly in the beginning. So I'm converting that then from, being dualistic Tantras to, non-dualistic. So he writes a non-dualistic commentary on the dualist. He converts them. That's the beauty of the tradition. Sorry,
may I ask a question related to what you were saying so far?
Please.
In any of the works of Abhinavagupta, did you find any influence of Vaishnavism?
Well, as I said, it's hard to say a direct influence because in any of these are more historic questions. In any of these texts, I don't have a pinpointed answer. As I would say, for instance, it's the case with Shakta or others and so on and so forth. But I don't have a if you read, for instance, if you read from another point of view, if we reverse the model, if you read, for instance, this, what is that, Samvit Prakasha, for instance, Samvit Prakasha of Vam, and you see that sounds so Shaiva text. I mean, it's clearly a Vaishnava text from one point of view, but that sounds like a super Shaiva text. So how do I decide? Just by the Mangala, he has done Narasimha Mangala, it's a Vaishnava text, or those kind of ideas that they have ingrained from each other, criticizing each other, and I grow, for instance, on the arguments or the contents of my opponent, philosophical opponent, or the system that I'm charging. These are kind of these objective questions which is hard to answer. No, would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. Then my another doubt is regarding the term you introduced, Chitradvayavada.
Uh-huh.
I'm very interested to know that how did
I too wanted to.
how did you
Basic.
know that term and what are the implications by
Say it again.
What are the implications by introducing that term? And
What
you made
do
it
you
your
mean?
own, or was there any reference to it anywhere in the literature?
Ajit, and what do you mean by implications?
Let me add my question also regarding that. That's a beautiful concept, Chitradvaitavada. But that term, is it coined by you or somebody else has used
No.
it?
It's in one footnote in Professor Rastogi's book on that epistemology in Kashmir Shaivism. He refers to this idea, and he has also quoted Arindam there saying that it was, I think, Ratna Kirti probably. Sorry, Jnana Shri Mitra. Jnana Shri Mitra has most probably used this term. I have come across this term also in other texts, but Chitradvayavada or Chitradvaitavada, I have not come across exactly the term anywhere in Shaiva literature as such. Yet, at the same time, as I showed you some examples, for instance, from Malini Vijayotara in particular, that there are implications of that this Chitrata of the Advaitavada, which makes a lot of sense to me in the sense because it is an in other words an oxymoron in terms of sweet poison, for instance. So I am saying there is variegated the Chitra and there is Advaitavada. So Advaitavada of many. Now that sounds like there is an inherent virodha there, but that's what is focus on that it is the unit, because when we try to understand and interpret the idea of unity, the unity principle, the unity idea or Advaita or non-dual idea cannot stand without presupposing the manyness or the duality and so on and so forth, fundamentally, philosophically speaking. So this unity of what? Unity has always to be in relation to something, that is to say, it is of what? Of the manyness. Right? And that's what the whole idea, if you see in the beginning, I showed you one verse from Manani Vijay. Again, it very clearly talks about that what is Dvaita, what is Advaita, and what is Dvaita, Advaita. I mean, of course, in some sense, he's representing also from that the para, apara, and para, and so on and so forth. Not very clearly said there. But fundamentally, that idea is very important. And I see only not verbally the term used in any of the works, but I see, if to use the word of Ajitan, I see implications in the sense that inherently embedded in many texts, this chitrata, what he means by that. Of course, not vichitrata in the sense, but chitrata is there, that manyness of the. You can compare it to for instance, this idea of Bahurupa, the Shiva, the Swachchanda Rupa as Bahurupa and so on and so forth. And Bahurupa is, manifested in some sense of what? The great Lord who is of many forms and many, images and so on and so forth. But the variegatedness, or you have, for instance, also the idea Mayurandara Sanyaya, the Mayuranda, there is no variegatedness in the egg, for instance, in the plasma, in that rasa. So where is that variegatedness coming out and so on and so forth? I hope that makes...
Yeah, thank you. And last one is from me.
Somebody else is asking a question, Ajitan.
Yeah, my last question. This I finish. So you were referring to a book in the beginning. Could you give me more details about it?
Which book, Adityan? In the
first part you said everybody should read a book.
Okay. That was, I think, later in the lecture. I said this More Than Real. More Than Real by David Schulman. That's
Okay, thank you.
Sir, may I ask one question?
Hello, Nirmala. Nice to see you again.
Hello. Thanks for your wonderful lecture. Actually, you've argued elsewhere that Abhinava's larger project was an aesthetic one, and his critical epistemology had an underlying aesthetic goal. And you've also mentioned about this overflowing joy, this Purnanandattva. In that point of view, whether it would be correct to say that we are intentionally creating the Chitradvaitavada, not the concept of Chitrata, because I think it's in Utpala also, Chitrabhasa Kriti. It says Shiva as Chitrabhasa Kriti. So we are intentionally creating this Chitradvaitavada to understand or experience this Purvanandata. What would you say?
I don't know what you mean by intentionally. See, remember, I think, and this whole exercise, I would always want to see that. See, there is a difference between historical work, the factual work, and then this is one of the. That's why if you see, when I kind of some parts I should have rather elaborated. No? Rather, I should read that again. This part, it was somewhere I had written. Just give me one moment, because that's, I think, somewhere very important what I wanted to say.
Actually, I meant by this intentionally means this Swatantriya, around Swatantriya.
Okay. So there is agency of me. Yes, absolutely. I would completely agree with you on that. Because that's the whole Did Abhinavagupta understand Ananda perfectly well? Of course, he was trying to understand him. He was trying to comment upon him. He was trying to give his own interpretation to Ananda's work, for instance. But did he correctly, this idea, did he exactly correctly understand what Ananda wanted to say? Now that for me is a stupid question. What Ananda wanted to say is clear from his own text. If Abhinavagupta is wanting to, let's use the word which is not, I don't know if you, I mean the word is not always negative word, manipulate. If Abhinavagupta is manipulating Ananda to make his own point, this has happened throughout the tradition. You have everybody manipulating Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads to make their own point according to what they think from their own creative philosophical point of view was right. That's why I think there is where we stop. We're like, okay, wait, no, Bhagavad Gita has only one meaning. That is challenging the whole Kavya Shastric world. You can never have one meaning of any of these texts. And I have the liberty as a thinking, as a conscious, as a Chaitana agent, Chaitana Karta, that and remember the swatantra I have as a creative thinker. Of course, not that I can also write a stupid commentary on something, and people can take me to task and scholars can take me to task, but I have to, in order for me to creatively exercise my own creative philosophical imagination and agency, I have to go beyond Abhinavagupta, which is very hard because he himself is so, so Catholic, so polymath, so across the boundaries. So it's very hard for me to be creative with him or anyone else for that matter, or with any other philosophers or scholars. But we have to make attempt to exercise that, what the great Panini said, Swatantra Karta, we have to adhere to that. That's the whole Swatantra Vada. I have to exercise my own creative power in not only interpreting but reinterpreting. And that is somewhere the whole fundamental point what I wanted to exhibit to students is that I am not a jada. I have to think about what does it mean, jada dharmam, adharmam cha. What does this, I can't say, oh yes, this is Abhinavagupta, this is X, this is Y, this is Y. That's compartmentalization. Okay, done and said. Now I have understood that basic thing. Now what? What do I do with that? Stop thinking? I know every historical fact about the history of Shaivism, this happened, that. But now what do I do with this all information? What do I do with Tantra Loka? Like I had a very hot debate once, I remember, with a scholar. So I was told that, oh wait, but you want to understand Tantra Loka as a text of philosophy? I mean, you are so stupid. Isn't it Abhinavagupta himself saying it is a paddhati, it's a ritual manual? Of course he is saying that. Of course it's a paddhati, it's a ritual manual. Who is saying no to that? But is Tantra Loka not a book of philosophy? That's a fundamental question. What? Because that one can answer only if one is trying to understand each and every word, each and every effort that Abhinavagupta is trying to make there in each and every anka. 35 Shastra Melana, what is that? What is he trying to do there? Or other parts, of course some are more ritualistic, some are less ritualistic, and so on and so forth. That's the whole point. But I think I want to emphasize this point, particularly for students who are probably still present here, is that see, you have been reading Kalidasa since when Kalidasa was born, since when he wrote Shakuntala. Of course we can read it for our pleasure, and we can read whatnot world literature for our pleasure. We can read Shankara since when Shankara wrote Bhashya, and so on and so forth. Now what? The critical scholarship is all about that. Now what? What do I do with that? I have learned every bit the text. Okay, Adhyasa I know by heart, the whole text. Now what? That's why I have more respect for traditional scholarship, because in traditional traditional scholarship, these questions, not always though, but I think many of you would know, because these questions are asked always, now what, and somebody, exactly, somebody is trying to, argue with Shankara that, oh, I don't agree with this point, I don't agree with this point, and writing a small new text in Sanskrit and saying that, okay, that's my point of view. But otherwise, we are all jadas. I'm sorry, including me, I'm saying. So we have to be Chetana Padarthas in some sense.
Yes, thank you. As we say, all these Vimala Vyavaharas, intellectual exercises, give some kind of ananda.
Totally. No, completely agreed with you, Nirmala, on that. Completely agree with you on that. Absolutely.
So, friends, shall we wind up?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Ajitan?
Yes, sir.
इदानीं प्रत्यक्षं भवति प्रत्यक्षरूपं भवान् एव आभाति इदानीमेव.
Thank you, Manoj.
So nice.
So, as you know, this is the second lecture in the Pratibhijna series. And when we thought of conducting a lecture series on Abhinavagupta in connection with his Jayanti celebrations, first name that popped up in our minds of Mrinal Kaul. And we are lucky today that Mrinal joined today with us to ponder over multifarious approach of Abhinavagupta. He spoke about the nature of Bhairava, Adhikari, etc. and introduced us a wonderful term, Chitradveva. Thank you, Mrinalji, for giving us an exciting lecture today. And we are very lucky today to have you with us. And thanks to all those who were online, those who listened to his speech, and their comments, and making this program a wonderful whole. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ajitan. Thank you so much. Thanks, Sundarishan sir.